have Mr. Anand Gupta. We have Mr. Andre Bakrao. We have Mr. Rigzit Gumet. We have Mr. Piyush Gade and Mr. Thundup Namgela. Can you just call Piyush? Oh, Piyush, I'm sorry. Thank you. So I don't think I'll need to go ahead and give you an introduction. It was already done. That would be redundant. So Anita ji, please lead the session.
We shall begin with the student papers. And welcome to all of you. So wonderful to see you young people who will be presenting your papers. The first presenter is going to be Ms. Neerja Wangmo. She graduated from Lady Shriram College, New Delhi. Did her master's and MPhil from Delhi University in Buddhism philosophy, and currently she's pursuing her PhD from JNU Delhi. And she'll be speaking about the mind-brain paradox. You have 5 minutes.
Good afternoon, everyone. So the topic would be the mind and brain paradox. Sorry. So I'd like to start with first thanking Tibet House, Geshe Dorji Damdullah, and Professor Sion Ramonla for giving me this opportunity. And for centuries, thinkers, philosophers have delved into this subject of the mind and brain paradox, because it is the very existence of because our very existence depends upon the interplay between the two, and which determines our state of happiness and state of misery. So the first slide that I have is a comparison between the mind and brain. So the brain, which is an objective phenomena, while the mind is a subjective phenomena. The brain being the substantial entity, which is tangible, while the mind is a non-substantial entity and it's intangible. And the brain is composed of physical parts, while the mind is composed of temporal parts. The mind abides in time. And the brain can be known through a scientific and empirical approach, while the mind is more of a phenomenological or naturalistic approach. And the concept of qualia that we have today, which is a subjective conscious experience. And the third is the brain is a third-hand experience, while the mind is a first-hand experience. And the brain is like the container, and the mind is like the content in the container. So I'd just like to give a few points about the human brain. It's a soft, squishy matter that weighs 2% of our human weight. It consumes 20% of the total energy produced by our body. During early pregnancy, neurons develop at a rate of 250,000 neurons per minute. There are about 100 billion neurons in an adult brain. Each neuron connects with approximately 40,000 synapses. There are as many as 10,000 specific types of neurons in the brain. Human brain can process information as fast as 432 kilometers per hour, which is faster than a Formula 1 racing car, whose speed is 386 kilometers per hour. It can also generate electricity 12 to 25 watts, enough for a low watt LED light. Human brain over the past 20 years has shrunk by the size of a tennis ball. So the earliest record of the study of brain dates back to 17th century BC during the Egyptian period. And this is a picture where you find the word brain in the Egyptian script, and that script on the top is the word for brain. And this treatise is now in the rare book room of the New York Academy of Medicine. So to to talk a little bit about the mind in Buddhism. We've heard about the definition of mind yesterday. It is defined as a clear and knowing agent. So that mind can be divided into different divisions. So the twofold, I'll just like to state few of the divisions. There's the twofold divisions of the mind is a non-conceptual, direct perception, and a conceptual mind. So direct perception, to briefly explain, would be when the mind engages with its object directly. So like all of us seeing the screen, so that's like having a direct perception. While the conceptual mind is when you get to the object through a generic image or a mental image. For example, if you all sit and think about His Holiness the Dalai Lama in this hall, so we use the generic image of His Holiness. So that's the conceptual mind. So in terms of its subtlety, mind can be divided. Okay, I'll just briefly. So there are 5 types of mind according to the subtlety would be waking state, dream state, REM sleep state, unconscious state, and mind at the time of dying. So this is, as it goes down, the subtlety of the mind increases. And the mind can be divided into mind and the 51 mental factors, and the 7 divisions of the mind is valid cognition, inferential cognition, subsequent cognition, correctly assuming consciousness, non-discerning direct perception, doubting consciousness, and wrong consciousness. So the 7 divisions of the mind, as we ascend, we go from a wrong consciousness to a correct consciousness, and ultimately we have to establish the valid cognition, which is the very purpose of Buddha giving all the 84,000 teachings. And I'd like to just briefly quote the word of salutation by Acharya Dekhnag and Pramana Samuchaya, on which these 4 lines, Acharya Dharmakirti wrote a commentary of 283 stanzas, chapter 2 of Pramana Vartika. The one who is transformed into the reliable guide, motivated by altruism. Can I take 3 minutes, please? Because I'm coming to the main part. Okay, so here the whole debate in Pramana Vartika is how does one become a reliable guide? And then when you come down like with your reasonings, this concept of great compassion, which can be practiced, which is difficult to practice in one lifetime. So then the concept of rebirth and many lives come about. So there's a whole debate between Acharya Dharmakirti and the opponents. So I'd like to pick this passage from In Search of Memory by Dr. Eric Kandel. And Geshe-la yesterday had stated about the 2 hypotheses. Mind, according to the current neuroscience standpoint, mind does not exist, it's just the brain, the first standpoint. The second is mind exists, but it's a byproduct of the brain. So if we go about with these 2 hypotheses, I have about 7 points that I'd like to discuss. So the first one would be, according to science, if the atoms in the universe are conserved in the form of matter and energy and they never annihilate, then it could be true for the mind as well. The mind could also continue endlessly. And the second would be the lifespan of the body cells. Okay, I'll just skip this second point. The third point I'd like to state is, according to the second hypothesis, if the brain is a substantial cause of the mind, then why is it that there is no mind at the time of death? And the second hypothesis also suggests mind being the derivative of the brain, which means the mind is the result of the brain. So in this case, there are just 2 possibilities. Either the mind and the brain are sequential, or the mind and the brain are simultaneous. So according to Buddhist logic, we could explain the mind and brain being sequential like the fire and the smoke. In that case, the mind should have a substance, which is different from the brain. And in the second case, if the mind and the brain were to be simultaneous, like the table and the top plank of the table, in that case, the Buddhist logic strictly states that 2 simultaneous distinct entities cannot be a dependee and a dependent, and it cannot have a causal relation. And the next point is, if the mind is the byproduct of the brain, then it can be said that having a healthy mind, healthy body, should give rise to a healthy mind. Healthy brain and healthy body should give rise to a healthy mind. which doesn't happen.
You've got three
Sorry.
minutes more. It's not fair to be
Okay. All right, I'll just end with that. You can just read through. Thank you.
Our next presentation is Anand Gupta. He is a research scholar at the School of International Studies, JNU. He did his post-graduation in ancient Indian history. He is currently working on cultural heritage of Afghanistan as a PhD fellow in JNU. Please do try and stay to 5 minutes,
Okay.
and I will give you a 1 minute warning. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, respected guests. Considering the time limitations, I will try to manage in 5 minutes. The topic of this paper, sorry, I don't have slides, so I will try to manage. The topic of this paper is reading body and mind, mental and physical health in considered in Jataka narratives of Buddhism. So this work is a historical work based on the text named Jatakas, and firstly I would try to frame the temporal and spatial factors of Jataka narratives. Actually, Jataka texts are part of the Khudak Nikaya, which is the last section of the Sutta Pitaka of Buddhist canonical texts, and it is based on the time around the second half of the first millennium BC, around the second urbanization period of ancient Indian history. These texts refers or reflects the social and economic changes of that time. So through these texts, the paper tries to examine why our new religion called Buddhism, its philosophy was seeing the mental and physical health, and this paper would try to see how the Jataka stories, which is the folk tales of Buddhist texts, see the mental or physical health of the community. First of all, I would like to say what is health. According to WHO, health is generally understood in a positive manner as a status of complete physical, mental and social well-being, and not simply the non-existence of sickness or ill health. A scholar, John Powers, in his work on Buddhism, work A Bull of a Man, Images of Masculinity, Sex and the Body in Indian Buddhism, talks about the definition of the body. According to him, the Sanskrit term kaya has the primary meaning of the body, and it can refer to a physique of being or the embodiment of the qualities in a person. He talks about the body of Buddha and consider it as the truth body. So it has been stated that whoever sees the truth body sees the Buddha. The Jataka stories are full of descriptions of the truth body, and in the previous birth of Buddhas, the Buddha as Bodhisattva was born with mighty powers. So in these stories, the body of Buddha is shown in some way that it has power because of its mental or physical, we can say its mental and physical powers. It is something different from the common people. One more thing I would say that there is a philosophy of Buddhism which revolves around the karma, and it also relates with the body. According to Indian Buddhist philosophy, bodies are largely the products of our own action. Karma dictates the kind of body we get in any lifetime, whether male or female, healthy or sick, beautiful or ugly. The Jataka stories narrated the changing nature of body in due to acts done in previous births. And one more important thing is that the stories which reflects the philosophy of Buddhism, which says that sickness is the part of life. And I would state some examples from the stories, as in the Hattipala Jataka talks about sickness as an integral part of life. Human life is distressed by the succession of continuation, troubled by origin, crumble, sickness, demise, and unlike gods, humans grow old and their flesh shows the mark of wrinkles. These instances show that disease is the very basic nature of the body, which lives with it and leaves the body only with that. So the philosophy of health and the philosophy of Buddhism, these correlates here, and they do not see disease as any other thing, but it sees as an integral part of body, and the human body has to deal with it. For Buddhism, sickness is an unavoidable component of life, and like old age, death, sickness is inescapable and bound to produce some degree of affliction. The paper has many such instances in Jataka stories where Buddha is teaching his followers that how they can deal with such problems. As in the Kanchan Kantha Jataka, Buddha preached.
You are done in 5
Just
minutes, a little bit.
Just 1 minute. I would conclude. Just 1 minute.
Maybe we should increase it to 8 minutes each because
I think that would be better. One more thing I would conclude that in Kanchan Kantha Jataka, Buddha preached among his followers that they must take care of 3 aspects: the voice, the mind, and the body. So in this way we can see that physical and mental health are not the other things. They are correlated, and the human body, the spiritual aspect of the human body is capable of dealing with it. And
okay, Anand. I think we are done now.
okay, thank you.
Our next speaker is Mr. Andre Valentin Bakrao. He's a first year MA student at the School of Buddhist Studies, Philosophy and Comparative Religion, Nalanda University, Rajgir. His topic for today is Yogacara and Western Psychology, Friends or Foes. Again, let me please remind you about the 5 minutes and 1 minute before that.
Okay, hello, good afternoon. I'd like to thank everybody for being here. Thank you, Geshe Damdullah and Tibet House for offering us the opportunity to speak. Yes, 5 minutes, especially for a philosophy paper, might be slightly difficult to make of an argument, but I'd like to start with a little bit of an overview. So, during the Buddhist time, as well as when the Yogacara school was initially developed by Vasubandhu and Asanga, there wasn't much of a categorical distinction between what we call today psychology and philosophy. Sure, today the nomenclature and this academic obsession to label things that this is psychology, this is philosophy, and so forth, might create different departmental specialties and so forth. But when it comes to us discussing philosophy, when it comes to us discussing what the Buddha initially wanted for us to know about the mind, these kind of barriers are not as relevant. So therefore, I think that it is important for us to address Western psychology and the Yogacara school through a similar kind of language. And the reason why I chose the Yogacara school as opposed to other representations of Buddhist philosophy is because throughout my research and experience, I think that the Yogacara school is a good linguistic representation as to how science discusses the mind today. It is by no means an argument or a claim that the Yogacara school has a higher view than Chandrakirti or somebody else, but rather that the way we discuss the mind in the Yogacara school, and specifically the self, is very akin to how current contemporary conventions of Western psychology discuss the mind. So as far as methodology, just some slide jargon. So most of my training so far has been in philosophy, so a significant way as to how I address the problem is through a lens of philosophical analysis. And then yesterday we've heard the term meta-awareness, and through my experience of literature, metacognition is a similar term. I'm sure in terms of the generalities, they mean same things, but I'm not sure in the technical aspect if the implications are the same. And then again, it is important to contextualize the way Western psychological jargon works in the Yogacara school and vice versa, because when we use words that were initially emerging in the Buddhist conventions might be initially hard to translate in a theoretical context of Western psychology and vice versa, and this paper is trying to address such issues. The theory of contrast that I think both the Eastern and Western thinkers and philosophers and psychologists should consider is this theory of contrast that is from the Pesso's paper, a Finnish psychologist, which says it has been suggested that self-perceptions are formed in interaction with one's environment, influenced by evaluations by significant others, and by reinforcement of and attributions for one's behavior. Now, this is important because when we talk about what the self is or is not, we talk about its habituation, we talk about its conditioning, right? And this is something that applies to both Western psychological conventions as well as the Yogacara school. It's important for us to understand the lens and the objects of perception through which we discuss the word self in itself. And then one of the contrast papers from Nicholas, Sean, and Stitch, whom are both also very interested in philosophy. So they also make this claim that the way we talk about the self and the way the brain cognizes a self is in relation to desires, beliefs, and so on, and how these create what they call propositional attitudes inside the mind in order to generate desire for action and so forth. And this is from their paper, how they discuss that their cognition in itself is similar to a machine, right? It has an input, it has outputs, and so on. And based on that, beliefs and desires work as these objects of dichotomizing the process of decision-making, and how this in itself influences behavior, and it influences the capacity of self-cognition and also the capacity of self-motivation and the potentiality for volition and action in itself. Okay, and this image is from the great scholars of Wikipedia, but it is a very traditional Pali way of looking at how the five aggregates interact with our sense of self, right? This paper by no means is trying to interact with, the existentialist aspect of what is the self at the ontological level, but rather in the mere sense of language, right? How do we talk about the self? What does that mean for Western scholarship, and what does it mean for contemporary developments in Buddhist studies? And again, as we likely most of us, if not all of us, know, the Buddhist concept of self is, this amalgamation of the five aggregates of form, feeling, perception, and so forth. As for the Yogacara aspect, this is Vasubandhu's arguably contribution in one PowerPoint slide, if it can be somehow summarized, right? So it's basically that I've looked at the Abhidharma Kosha, and these passages that you find here are from the first and the third text. This translation is slightly old. It's, I believe, it's from late 80s, early 90s, but it's still fairly decent. And the Abhidharma Kosha is usually translated in 4 volumes. These passages, again, are from the first and the third one. And just look at the linguistic similarities, right? That how Sean and Stitch were addressing their paper, and as well as how Vasubandhu talks about what this mind is, this amalgamation of sensorial experiences and conceptual frameworks, as well as perceptions, inferences, and so on. And how these dharmas, these states of mind, are a mind that possesses desire, but desire in itself is not the mind. It is an object of perception for the mind to cognize volition. So that is very similar to how Sean and Stitch discuss what the mind is. But it's also important to think about how this arises a sense of mind, a sense of I, right? It arises, this sense of I that we have is an emerging property, right? It is a result of this amalgamation of the five aggregates. It is a result of, these through Western lens, this compounding of these beliefs and these desires that behave as objects of perception. They're not perception themselves, but again, they contribute to our language of self. Thank you.
He deserves another clap for finishing all our sentences. Our next speaker is Mr. Prinzin Gurme, and he's currently pursuing his PhD in Buddhist Studies from Delhi University, and he will be presenting on mental health problems, their solution from Buddhist psychological point of view. Again, please may I remind you that it's 5 minutes.
Respected Venerable Geshe-la and scholars and my dear brother and sisters. So I have a very little knowledge about Buddhism, and my knowledge of neuroscience is zero, and my English is broken. So, a mental problem is a psychological disorder that causes mild to severe disturbance and makes us incapable to cope with life's ordinary demands and affect mood, thinking, and our behaviors. WHO studies shows that 2 out of every 5 people may experience a mental disorder. 1 out of 17 are suffering serious mental disorder, and nearly 1 million people commit suicide every year. So mental health, something many people know about, but do not truly understand the complexity and seriousness regarding the effects it has on a person. We don't look after mental disorder the way we look after our physical health. We consume excessive negative thoughts the way we consume burgers and others fast food. I remember the stanza of Shantidev, Acharya Shantidev. It says the Dungil Durdu se mekyan Dungil ngilangwa burgyuk. Dewa doing a timu pe rangi dewa radarjum. It means though we want to avoid the suffering and we run after the suffering, and though we don't want though we want happiness and we destroy it like our enemy. So I don't want to discuss all these types of anxieties and so I just see, if we speak to someone who is affected by mental illness, chances are that we will hear a story of hidden suffering, shame, and discrimination in nearly every sectors of their lives. So I don't want to discuss all this except one. Like here, Buddhism means Nangpa in Tibetan. Nangpa, it means the one who is looking within. So the functions of emotions and how to deal with it, and through that how to become happy and enjoy a happier life. So here His Holiness Dalai Lama said that the Buddha's teaching is that you're your own master. Everything depends on yourself. And also Buddha himself said, I can show you the path. The going to the path and destination, it's totally depend on individual. So here I want to discuss a little bit on this thing. This slide. So this is I just draw this diagram. So this is our senses. How we are 5 aggregates like senses. When it interact with objects, and it generates either destructive emotions and constructive emotions, and that links to our impression or habit that is in our mind, and again this influence to our senses, and it is a circle. So we cannot we cannot interact with objects properly, because it's because of our it says three evil wisdom: not knowing and knowing wrong and doubt. It is like if you are uncertain whether there is a rope or a snake, you have a doubt, and if you mistake a rope for a snake, you have an error, and because of that you suffer. And I don't want to discuss all the mental factors here. And I just want to say that happiness or suffering is not a random occurrence. This is a cause for the suffering and equally a cause for the end of the suffering. The benefit of practicing this, like understanding through the wisdom and Buddhist practice, one can become a more relaxed or more focused and calmer, free from worries, having better understanding of oneself and others, and having more positive emotions. So I just so like how to make it's like how to control our mind. It's His Holiness, or like it in philosophy there's called it's categories of sultim, like ngejudem betsudim kewachude gitsudim and simjude gitsudim. It is like it is mentioned in beyond religion, as well as in the ethics of new millennium, the ethics of restraint, ethics of virtue, and ethics of altruism. I don't want to discuss here ethics of restraint and ethics of virtue. I just want to just a little bit about the ethics of altruism. It's very effective. Even whenever I practice it, like I feel more calmer, and when with that practice, when I meet with the different people, like it is more comfortable. So there's many kinds of practicing this altruism. There's a one the very effective it's a Tonglen practice. Tonglen practice is taking and giving practice. It's replacing others' suffering into yourself and practicing it. And through that you generate the compassion towards other people. And other one is considering all the living beings as your own mother, and through that you generate the compassion towards the all the sentient beings. The conclusion, temporarily, Buddhist psychology can make us able to think, feel, and react in the way we want. Ultimately, this will lead us to understand the situation and reality of the object. Thank you very much.
The next speaker is Mr. Piyush Gade. He is a student of BTech in Electrical Engineering at PNIT. Oh, sorry, he says BTech is completed. He is no longer a student. And he attended retreats and teachings at Deer Park. His topic is Buddhism, the ancient science of mind.
Tashidileg, dear friends, Geshe-la, all the venerable monks, neuroscientists, scholars, professors. Frankly, I was not sure about the topic, because after coming here, I came to know that people were free to choose their own topic. So anyhow, this presentation is going to be a really general one. I'll avoid going into the technicalities of the neuroscience as well as Buddhism. I'll try to establish a general relationship between these two. So what are we here for? Are we here to put the Galileos in the dungeons, or to tell the religious people that it's not the sun that revolves around the earth, or it is the earth that revolves around the sun? So we have evolved a lot. We are not going to do in this go into this blame game, but the purpose why we why this conference is organized is not a deliberate attempt to give a scientific color to religion. As you can see in the original Kalam Sutta, Buddha has said that mind is the center of all, mind creates everything. This is the importance that's been given to mind. Mind is central. And because mind is central, therein comes neuroscience, right? And there are other principles, scientific principles, because of which science gets associated with Buddhism. But I'll try to, it is essential to focus on the social aspects of Buddhism a little bit, and the history of Buddhism. So basically, when Buddha, during the age of Buddha, the Indian society was in a vicious state. So we had something called as the fourfold classification of the society, called the Varna system, and we were divided into the caste system. So there was caste antagonism amongst the people, and people were fighting amongst themselves. The women were denied the right to seek liberation. So Buddha thought that this is not wholesome. I need to set a good moral precedent in the society. I need to transform the world. And for that, the path that Buddha chose to transform the society, to transform the world, was transforming people's minds. So this is how mind came to be related. So basically, Buddha did a social revolution. And the history might be a little controversial, but if we realize that in the ancient Chinese literature, India has been referred to as the Buddhist kingdom, or the priestly class of the Hindus. Basically, Buddha's Sangha was 75% the priestly class of the Hindu religion. So basically, we could trace the roots of all the Indians to Buddhist religion. So if you look at it like that, then the history might not appear controversial. So basically, the aim of Buddha was to eradicate the suffering of the mankind by setting a good moral order in the world. We also have to be clear about the difference between Buddha's Dhamma and religion, because there are some common aspects. We do have a proponent of a religion, we do have scriptures, there are some of the similarities, but there are some fundamental differences. For example, Buddha's Dhamma doesn't rely on scriptures or ceremonies or rituals or God or things like that. The Dhamma is observed in the observance of the tenets in your own life. It is basically the implementation of Dhamma. It's a way of life. The purpose of the Dhamma is basically clear in Buddha's dialogue with Sunnakhatta and Potapada, these two Brahmins, where Buddha is clearly telling them that my purpose is not to speculate about the origin of the universe or to explain the origin of the universe and go into those theories. My immediate concern is to relieve the suffering of the mankind. There was also prevalent fallacious view of karma, that karma is inherited from your past lives and it goes on continuing. So I personally find this doctrine really uninspiring, because it reduces the centrality of man. It reduces basically the importance of man, because it gives an impression that everything is scripted and man doesn't have any role in that. But Buddha replaced this doctrine, this prevalent doctrine of karma, with a scientific view. So basically, Buddha said in scientific terms that the karma is inherited from the parents, but on top of that, the humans' karmas and humans' minds are shaped more by the conditions in which he's living. So these are some of the fundamental aspects which we need to look at. But then why do we have to establish a relation between religion and science? So in words of Alfred Whitehead, an English mathematician and philosopher, the relation between science and religion is going to determine the future of humanity. Everyone is familiar with this quote of Einstein. So Buddha, while educating his followers, he said that you don't have to accept anything on the face value. You have to examine things for yourself. Even if I am saying that. So Buddha basically there is hardly any religion in the world which is throwing itself to such open criticism. And it is because of this that there is the scope for interaction between the scientists and the Buddhists. So it is the natural qualities of Buddhism that allows for such an interaction. It is basically these aspects which are given in Buddhism, that is the centrality of the mind, the dependent origination, law of impermanence, sunyata, and interdependence, that we have been able to establish, because this is the approach which Buddha adopted. He was not speculating on scientific things, but this was the approach. For example, he accepted the law of cause and effect, right? So we could see how in physics, physicists have accepted this law of cause and effect. Nothing is. The neuroscientists have verified that an independent self does not exist, which Buddhism has been saying since a long time. I don't have a conclusion, so I like to conclude in last 1 minute. So basically, the most important doctrine is the dependent origination and interdependence. So we ought to know that none of the problems of the world can be seen in isolation, because we are all interconnected. So you can see the analogy of this ocean and the waves over there. So you can see that the two waves, there is a story that one wave tells the other wave that, look, we are going to die, we are going to crash at the shore. But the other wave tells the other wave that you're not a wave, you are a part of the ocean. So we are a part of an interconnected web of a web of interconnectedness which extends infinitely. So the problems of the world cannot be solved in isolation. Karma somewhere else is going to affect somewhere else. For example, today we have brought humanity to a place, to a situation where just the press of a button could destroy the entire humanity, right? The policies of the consumerism. Yeah. Thank you.
And our last presentation for today is Dr. Nambial. He is pursuing a PhD in neuroscience at Amity University, and his research area is neuropharmacology. He will be speaking on neuroscience of empathy. Don't just laugh 5 minutes, okay?
Okay, ma'am.
minute extra just because everybody else got 1 extra mark. Okay?
Yes, ma'am. I think I will take less than 5 minutes.
Okay.
Good afternoon, everyone. And first of all, I would like to thank Geshe Dojirandula and Tibet House for giving me this opportunity. And actually, I don't have any PPT, PowerPoint. So I will try to explain, recently I've read one book by V.S. Dr. Ramachandra. So I would like to share what his thought on this empathy and how the neuroscience is relating with empathy. So I think I will take less than 5 minutes. So we all know that we all are social animal, and especially human being, we are like a complex social animal. So we have to depend on each other. And so based on that, now we have this course in MIT, and in other universities, social neuroscience. So where we are used to study all those things, how one mind is affecting others, and how one a person's thought is affecting other people's. So first of all, I would like to start from this. We all know what is the empathy. Empathy is like a feeling when you see someone is in suffering, and that pain is feels you. So that is the empathy. So for this, what neuroscience they used to believe is in 1992, some Italian neuroscientists they have discovered some specialized neurons, and these neurons are called mirror neuron. So how they have discovered is when they are studying on monkey's brain. So when they gave or they fed the monkey with a banana, they saw some in brain region, especially in anterior cingulate, some neurons are firing. When you gave the banana to a monkey, and when monkey is eating banana, that time the monkey's brain, the motor neuron, the sensory neuron, the interneurons, all these are activating. But thing is, afterward, when the monkey is seeing the other monkey or the experimenter, when they are eating this banana, still some more neurons are some subset neurons of that areas are still activating. So they came to know that even though you are performing the tasks, or you are watching the other people's performing the tasks, some set of the neurons are firing, and these neurons are called mirror neuron. Now in Ramachandra's book, he have give some other name for this mirror neuron. He have mentioned Gandhi neuron also, and he have mentioned also a neurological Wi-Fi. It's something we share, even though there is no connection, direct connection between our brain with other persons, but still we share some knowledge and some feeling when we see the other people's performing tasks. So for mirror neuron things, what best example we can give is a child and mother. When child is upset, when the mother see her child is upset, she will become also upset. Even though there is no direct stimulus for the mother to become upset, but still she is upset. This means we are sharing indirectly, we are sharing some part of our brain, even though we are not directly connected with each other. And especially this empathy, for empathy, suppose if you cut your finger, you will feel pain, and the person who is looking at you, he will also feel pain. So when neuroscientists they study on these things, what they have found is when you feel pain, the pain experience is mainly in the region of anterior cingulate. So it turns out that the anterior cingulate neurons that are responsible for my thumb being pumped, or if I cut my thumb, I feel pain, and that time the pain experience comes in my cingulate gyrus. But the other person, suppose any one of you, if you saw me as cutting my thumb, and the pain stimulus which you received, seeing by my this cutting thumb, and same area of the brain, some set of the neurons are firing, and they came after that they came to know that this is an act of empathy. Like when you see someone is like a pain and you feel that pain. So like what I want to tell you is like through these things we can develop like this good skill, like empathy. In Tibetan we used to call ninje. Like this is a good deed. So like we can like try, and as a most of the neuroscientists, they used to tell the neurons which are firing together are wiring together. This means like the more you practice, the more you become professional. So thank you.
Thank all these wonderful young people with all their presentations.
Should I go on?
Yeah, please.
Thank you so much to our chairperson, Dr. Anita ji. As well as she conducted the session, I'm sure it was really difficult for her to sort of cut them out in between. And I really feel for the speakers as well. I mean, please take it positively as a learning experience to manage your presentation as per the time constraint in future. And you did a really good job. I mean, there were times I was going like, I hope you can finish it within time. And I'm really sorry if it was anything difficult for you. Having said that, we would now like to present them with the certificates. So I would like to ask our director, Geshe Dojit Abdullah, to do the honor. We'll start with Nilza Wangmo. Oh, I'm sorry, the chairperson, Dr. Anita Dudane. Thank you so much, ma'am. We have Ms. Nilza Wangmo. Please give them a huge round of applause. They did really well, I mean, really well. Then we have Mr. Anand Gupta. Then we have Mr. Andre Bakrao. Or Mr. Rigzen Gurmet. Mr. Piyush Gade. And Mr. Thundub Namgilla. Thank you so much, all the participants. Thank you, Geshe-la.